friends. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative. I'm so delighted to introduce you to Dorothy Greco. She's an award-winning photographer, author, and speaker who addresses midlife issues in her 2020 book, Marriage in the Middle, which follows her 2017 Making Marriage Beautiful. Dorothy shares lessons learned as she and her husband, Christopher, have drawn closer to God and each other over their past 33 years of marriage. Dorothy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I was going to tell you, this is what I did to your book. Thank you for sending it. I really enjoyed it. It hit me right where I am, being in my mid 50s and about to celebrate my 29th wedding anniversary. So
Congratulations.
it was, well, thank you. And it was anyway, it was right in my wheelhouse. But you describe a midlife marriage as one in transition. And I love your statement. You said the paradox of midlife marriage, crisis or opportunity. Could you unpack that for us and describe what all that meant?
Yes. So I think oftentimes when people hear the term midlife, right, they immediately go to somebody spinning out of control and acting irresponsibly, buying a sports car, dissing their family, getting a divorce or doing something that's really um, not very wise.
Yeah.
And that does happen, but I think that there are reasons why it happens, right? We are facing just a tremendous amount of instability and disequilibrium during midlife because there's so many changes happening. There's changes happening in our bodies, both for women and men. There is a thing called andropause that men go through that's similar to menopause, only it's spread out more, so it's not as dramatic. Our parents often pass away during midlife. If we're parents, our kids will move out, maybe get married, maybe start their own families. We might have job insecurities that come up. So there's just all these things that, oftentimes in our 30s and 40s, things feel a little bit stable. Like, yeah, we got this. We figured this out. And then, the late 40s, 50s, and 60s come, and all of a sudden it's like, what is happening?
Yeah.
My life just feels like it's unraveling. So I think for us to recognize that that's all happening, it's a real thing. We're not making it up.
Yeah.
But then to think about, well, how can what's happening be an opportunity for us to grow closer to God, to grow closer to each other in our marriages, and also to become more mature, more thoughtful, more caring, more loving people. So in that regard, it's a crisis of opportunity, and where it goes, the direction that it takes really is up to us.
Yeah, well, and you had talked about that, about how, during those earlier years of marriage, maybe that first you're really busy. Like if you have children, you're really busy. You're just kind of marching in step next to each other. And then all of a sudden, all that distraction you mentioned in the book, you took your youngest to college and the dinner table's really quiet. I know we don't even usually do a dinner table. We just we just kind of my husband usually has a big lunch and we eat some yogurt and, move forward. And, it's like, how do you transition to that where you kind of find a new normal?
Yes, and that's exactly what it is, because the old normal doesn't work anymore. The way that again, not everybody has children, but if we do have children, there's a certain energy that they bring.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of distractions and things that we have to deal with being parents. And then when they go off on their own, whether it's to college or whether they, have a job and moved out, there is a certain loneliness that I think settles in on us as parents that we really have to reckon with, and we have to grieve. Like, that is a loss. It's not like our children have died, but they have moved on. They have left us behind and gone on with their lives. And that loneliness can trigger a lot of feelings. It can trigger a lot of bad behaviors, but it can also, again, give us the opportunity to talk and to say, well, how do we do dinners? How do we do vacations when it's just the two of us? How do we find ways to connect with each other in this new season when everything has changed? We have to decide where we want to take the marriage, how we want to foster it, grow it, nurture it really in this season. So it requires a lot of conversation, a lot of compromises, a lot of negotiations, and a lot of creativity.
Well, and even to like to normalize that, to say, you know what, this is okay. This is the reality, and you're not crazy for thinking that. I know my younger son is 24, and he just moved halfway across the country with a new job, and it's wonderful. But just knowing that I have permission, he lived 10 minutes away, and we go
Mhm.
exercise together, and I I do to have the
You
permission.
miss them,
Right,
right?
I do. I miss going, "Hey, let's go to Orange," and, "I booked you in this," we can't do that now. So,
Right.
and to know that it's okay to not have to be okay about that is really freeing. And you talk about some other challenges. You mentioned a little bit the challenge of, our bodies are not the same.
Yes, yes, for yes, with exclamation points. For women in particular, I think that, we hit perimenopause generally 45, 48, sometimes a little bit later than that. And that's a slow process. Our estrogen begins to diminish and decline. And with that, there's all kind of changes that happen for us. Like for me, it was a lot more tired during that season. Because of the drop in hormones, I was less interested in sex, which was really a shocker because that's always been like really important to me. The physicality of my body, I've had to work a lot harder to stay in shape. Like the weight just comes on so quickly.
Yeah.
So all of those kind of things, like if we're not again paying attention and being intentional about how we treat ourselves, how we care for ourselves, that can also just cause real problems for us.
Well, and again, giving yourself permission to do that self care, especially if you're crunched, because you talk about caregiving.
Yeah,
So many of us, have elderly parents. I'm about to go hop on a plane to see my 89-year-old dad, and have elderly parents, and yet maybe responsibilities with children, and then still with your spouse, and feeling that crunch and that pull. And the first thing that most people give up is their own self-care, but
yeah.
that's not the place to give up.
Right. It's self-care, I think, is probably the first thing because, we think, oh, it doesn't really matter. I can get away with sleeping less. I can get away with not exercising, whatever. And then the second thing often is the marriage, because we take it for granted. We think, well, we've made it this far. We're going to be fine. And in that season that I talk about in Marriage in the Middle, when my father was passing away, so he lived 5 hours away, and I was the, closest relative to take care of him. And that meant that pretty much every other weekend, I would be making that drive down to New Jersey, making him food, making sure he was getting to his PT appointments or whatever, and then driving back home and starting my life again on Monday morning. And I remember there was one night that I drove home. It was pouring, pouring rain. It was really, really dark. And I just was weeping, weeping, weeping over knowing that my father was going to pass away soon. I was so exhausted and I had nothing left to give my husband, like seriously. And we would talk about that. I would say, I'm really sorry, but I got nothing for you in this season. It's all I can do to hold on. I will try my best to be kind to you and to love you and to support you. But seriously, like, don't expect much of me during this season. And I think it's important for us to, reckon with that reality that we can't just keep, as women in particular, maybe as, because we're often the caregivers, we can't just keep giving out the way that we've been giving out without there being some serious consequences.
Well, and I love that story that you were just telling when you told your husband. It really reminds me, there was a time my dad was sick and he's 2 states away, and I had just loaded the kids up in the car and went to see him, and same thing on the drive home. There was this huge tornado going through the state of Oklahoma, and it was one of those fronts that goes all across I-35 from Kansas to Texas. By the time I finally got home with the kids, I was shaking. I had been driving for
I
12
believe it.
hours, and had just gotten my dad off of death's door in the hospital, and you just don't. But you bring up something in the book. You have some pillars of things that, just some hallmarks of ways to help each other, help treat each other. But one you said that you didn't put in the book, but you really wished you would have, that I thought was so important, was empathy. And even what you described to your husband and said, I don't have much right now, but a way a spouse can can move in with empathy. Let's talk about that because you said that was so important.
Yes, I think it is. And, in retrospect, I think, why did I not include that in the book? But it's too late. So, the notion that our spouses need different things from us in different seasons, I think is like a new category for me. Again, there was a sense of, I know who my husband is, I know who I am, I know who we are, therefore I know what we need. But as these seasons change, our needs change. And during that time in particular, I felt that I so needed comfort. I so needed somebody to just, for my husband to put his arms around me on a regular routine basis and hug me really tight and say, I love you. I'm so sorry that you're having to go through this. Tell me one thing that you need from me today, and I'll try to do it for you. So that sense of moving towards each other in those difficult spaces, because I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, I think what can happen is when our spouse is in a limited space, whether they're edgy, they're tired, they're sick, whatever, it can be easy to pull away and to
Yeah.
think like, ooh, I got to give that person some space because it's a little hot, a little prickly near him. What we actually need to do is be leaning in, and figuring out, how can I love this person even more extravagantly in this time when they are sad, or they, just need support. So that sense of empathy, which I think that it's not a word that's in the Bible, but I think that Jesus displays that pretty extravagantly again and again and again, of really moving towards and loving, not letting the other person's limitations cause him or us to draw back from the person in that space.
Yeah, I remember my mother died a couple of years ago, and just I remember feeling that I needed just exactly what you said. I needed, and like you, I'm a fairly independent person, but at that point, I needed that comfort. And we need it from our spouse, but we also need it from our friends. And you mentioned that in the book too, that you can find good, genuine community and fellowship that your spouse doesn't should really can't provide all of
Right.
meet every need, and that making time again for those friendships in midlife, keeping them up even when you're tired, even when you're stretched.
Yeah, I think that that's really, really crucial. My husband is a really wonderful person. He is kind, he is empathetic, he's a good communicator, but he's limited, as am I, right? So I cannot provide all the things that he needs, and he can't provide all the things that I need. We know that very clearly. So, for instance, he is about as extroverted as you could possibly imagine, and I am
I can.
probably about as opposite of him in that regard as possible. Um, so he loves to pray in large groups, put him in a group of 20 people and he could just pray for hours. But when it comes time to praying with me, he's less interested because it just feels a little less dynamic to him. And I'm on the exact opposite. Like big groups, I get distracted, I get sleepy. But if I'm sitting next to somebody, one or two friends, then I could pray for an extended period of time. So we've actually had a lot of conflict about that. And maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it just became clear to me, I need to reach out to my female friends who like to pray and just get together with them and pray, because then I won't be like badgering my husband to pray with me. Like, how awful is that? But I'll still get that need met to pray with people who really can listen to the Lord and just come together in a space that's supportive and helpful. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love, because you just gave an illustration of something that I found very profound in your book, how you talk about dealing with expectations and disappointments. And, after, 20, 30 years of marriage, you realize there are some things, some ways that you and your husband are just not going to be able to meet each other's needs. And
Yeah.
if there is a positive, healthy solution, like you just suggested, a very positive, practical solution of something you could do to meet your needs, it was appropriate, it was right, it was honoring to God. Because I think a lot of people in midlife, I mean, I know as I, think about friends, and I think, even, there are some things you wish that your spouse could do or would do. And you finally realize, kind of at this stage, you're like, what, that's not going to happen. And what do you do with that? Some people, they have that midlife crisis, or they start doing unwise behavior or take the wrong turn. but you help people kind of name it and address it in a positive way. Can we talk about that? Because I've never really heard anybody talk about that before in a
Yes.
reference.
I feel like I'm an expert on disappointment because I have been disappointed a lot because I have a lot of expectations. Now, I did not realize that I had a lot of expectations until I got married, strangely enough, and started feeling disappointed. So it took us a long time. It was year 10 that we really had, that was the hardest year for us.
Mm.
In terms of our personal relationship. Since then, we've had other hard seasons, but they have been external. So in that season really was a crisis of this very thing. I had expectations of him that I just was like, I was unwilling to let go of. I just thought, doggone it, like, I want you to romance me.
Eh,
And he is very not sentimental, and he sees romance as being sentimental. So, there it is. We had this clash of this is what romance looks like to me. I want flowers. I want a card. I want like a really, really thoughtful, doesn't have to be expensive, but just like one really thoughtful present for anniversary, Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas. Only 4 times a year. Seems reasonable to me. Um, but he, in his family, in my family growing up, my family was great at giving gifts. But the way we gave gifts is we gave each other lists. These are the 10 things that you could think about buying for me. So there wasn't any sense of like, what did you just give me? I don't want that. Where he really values originality. He wants something to be his own idea. And in his family, gift giving was like a horrible mess. His mother gave gifts to her kids that she wanted, knowing that her kids would then give them to her because they didn't want them. It was a really,
oh,
really like sick system. So he comes into marriage like, completely oppositional to even giving gifts at all. And I have this really high expectation of this is what it means to romance me. So, I mean, it's surprising given how smart we both are that it took us 10 years to figure out this is a problem and we can't keep running into this 4 times a year because it's really destructive. So we've been talking about it recently. I just said, why don't we just take a whole year off from giving each other gifts, unless it's just some spontaneous thing that one of us sees. And flowers are always okay, by the way. You can give them to me on any day. But again, it's that sense of seeing where we're disappointed and then tracing it back to what was the expectation. And sometimes the expectations are just unrealistic. I am never going to be as extroverted as he is, and he's never going to be still and quiet to the extent that I am. So those kind of things are not going to change. But the other areas where we might really have something that seems really important to us, like maybe for me, like I said, the prayer issue. I could moralize that preference and say, well, you should want to pray with me. Like, you're my husband. Why don't you want to pray with me? But that's not going to help the situation.
no.
So then what we have to do is evaluate, is the expectation that I'm carrying realistic based on who I married?
Yeah.
Right? That's really, really key. My husband has ADHD. He has huge attention issues, highly creative, highly energetic, but it's really hard for him to remember things. I cannot expect him to remember the things that we have talked about months and months ago, because he just won't.
Yeah.
So I have to be able to carry with me that sense of this is who he is. This is my expectation. That expectation is not realistic. So what am I going to do about that? And some of the expectations we can't let go of, fidelity, honesty, those kind of things should not be jettisoned. Being treated kindly. Like, I don't think we should ever give our spouse a bye if they are abusing us or in any way harming us. I want to be clear with that. But the other things that we carry with us and maybe, punish or withdraw when our spouse can't give them to us, that's what we have to have like really, really intense conversations and possibly even get help, like through a marriage counselor, to parse out, what is it that how can we work this through in a way that neither of us are feeling attacked or defeated, I guess.
Yeah. But just to come up with that and address that, and even to I mean, what freedom to kind of put that burden down, that, oh my goodness, this expectation that he's going to be able to be as in, or extroverted as I am, or you, or it just, okay, that's not, after almost 30 years, that's not who they are. So
Right.
let's move forward. And then, too, you talk about limitations that happen because of aging. And maybe there was something that y'all like to do together, but now because of a health concern or something that just we have to put that down too and move forward with grace and with kindness. And you actually had your one of your pillars that you talked about instead of withdrawing was engaging. Can we
Yeah.
talk about that and your pillars?
Yes, engagement. I think, again, often in midlife and even post that, there can be a real settling in. And, sometimes the routines that we settle into are wonderful. They're lovely. They're healthy. But sometimes we settle into routines that are not and that are a little lazy, maybe. So during this time, it gives us an opportunity to reevaluate, where do I need to reengage? And there's some things we need to let go of. Obviously, we can't keep doing all the things that we used to do when we were 20, when we're 50. We just can't. So there needs to be an evaluation and a discernment process. But staying engaged and not giving up, I think is it's a battle at times, because even just what we were just talking about with the expectations and disappointment, there are some disappointments that feel really heavy,
Yeah.
where we think, gosh, I really had hoped that this would be a different dynamic in our relationship, or I hoped that I would be different by this point. There can be disappointment with self as well. Um, but choosing to stay engaged, choosing to believe, because I think that the way the Lord created us is that we are wired to change, and now there's even neuroscience that backs that up, that neuroplasticity is true up until our 80s at least.
Wow.
Um, so we can expect or hope that change will happen, but we also need to be aware of the fact, as I'm sure you know, that change is slow. Like really fundamental change takes a long time and a lot of work. So it needs engagement for us to be able to make progress.
Yeah. And then speaking of change, another one of your pillar was malleability, which
Mhm.
I believe is somewhat of a synonym for that, a little bit at least.
Yeah, if you think about, metals, different metals have different malleabilities. So like gold can be pounded really, really thin into paper. So it's very malleable, where something like zinc just kind of shatters when it gets pounded. So we want to be malleable. We want to be able to allow the things that are going on in our marriages, with our parenting, with our parents, in the world, to change us for good. And it's, we're going to be changed. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, are we going to be moving towards God, towards that kind of Christ-like behavior, and towards learning how to love each other better? Or are we going to be, the kind of person that just crumbles and falls apart when difficult things happen?
Yeah. And that's not what we want. And then that leads us to resilience, being
Yes,
able to flex, because we're
right.
going to need to flex.
Right, and being able to say when hard things happen, I'm gonna just get back up. I'm gonna stay in the game. And again, if we decide to opt out at this phase, there's a lot of people who are depending on us.
Yeah.
From our parents to our siblings to our kids. Two of our three sons are married now, and figuring out what it looks like to be supportive to them in this season has taken a lot of work. It's so different. And I don't know whether that's we have all boys.
Me too.
There is a little bit of a strangeness about that, because my daughter-in-law's mom, very, very close relationship. But with my son, there has been a withdrawal to re-engage, as they should, with their wives.
Right.
So that requires malleability, that requires resilience, that requires engagement and empathy as well.
Yeah, just to be able to know what that looks like and to be able to move, as we do that with our adult children and then doing that with our husbands. And I love too how you talk about confession and
Mhm.
forgiveness with as kind of one of those steps forward, as maybe you deal with the expectations and disappointments, doing
Mhm.
that. That's been a huge hallmark, that growth and confession in your marriage and in what you recommend.
It has. And I will tell you that when we do these half-day workshops, which we've been doing for, I don't know, 15, 20 years now, it's often the topic that when we talk about it, we can tell that people are like, seriously, you really you think I should do that. Um, and that's a surprise to us because it's in the scripture. It's confession is not just for Catholics. I think that there is a way that when we come to our spouse and friends who are trusted and are able to communicate our besetting sins, the ways that our limitations cost our spouse, there is a way that that keeps us from future sin, because confession is humiliating. It always is. It's always humiliating to confess our sins. And that humiliation becomes a little bit of a barrier to doing it again. But there's also a way that confession requires self-reflection, requires self-awareness, it requires humility. And when we can come and say, for me, probably the most common thing is, I'm sorry that I was harsh with you last night at the dinner table. I was, and I'm sorry, period, not explanation, just full stop. Those kind of things I think can be very healing and help bridge gaps, because we might think that our spouse didn't notice, but chances are they did. Chances are they might have felt hurt. Maybe they didn't say anything because it was small, but when we can come and we, can initiate the conversation around the things that we have done that have been hurtful or harmful, I think that that allows our spouse again to trust us more and to move in. And that's what we want. We want to keep building trust, and we want to keep making it easier for our spouse to move closer to us.
Yeah. And when you talk about moving closer together, I love at the end of the book, you really share, you use a word called telos, which is not, super common in vernacular, but you talk about that having this shared vision and a journey. So unpack that big word for us and tell us what you mean.
Yeah, so it's a Greek word. Some people say telos, some people say telos. So it's telos. It essentially means it's similar to calling, but it's bigger than that. So when you think about it, telos, it's where is God calling you to go, and who is he calling you to go with, and how are you going to treat the people that you're going on that journey with? So it's much more comprehensive than simply calling. It's being able to say, look back and think, well, where has God shown up in my life? And where do I feel like I have felt his presence and his blessing? And how am I serving him, serving his kingdom, bringing his kingdom come to the earth? And then thinking about the person that we're married to, and how do we fit together in that? How do we create a telos where we are uniquely partnering side by side? And I think that, we all have a telos of love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? All of us have that. Anybody who says that they're a Christian, that's their primary telos. But then if you think about, well, who is our neighbor? Our most enduring neighbor is our spouse, right? So what does it look like to love them, serve them, but serve God together? Because my firm belief is that every single couple has something unique that they can offer to the world. And maybe that's world big picture, but could just be your neighbors, the people who live on your street with you. So I joke in the book that Kristen and I, we don't have very practical skills. Let's just say we don't have practical skills. We're the kind of people that you want to have with you if there's a crisis, because we're really good in a crisis situation, but do not hand us like a power tool with a spinning blade, because it won't go well. Like, we're both terrified. He's a pianist. He's terrified he's going to cut his fingers off. And for me, my father actually did cut his finger off.
Oh, no.
Yes,
No, power tools.
So I am terrified of those kind of tools. So sending us on a Habitat for Humanity build would not be smart. But one of the things that we've been doing for the past 5 or 6 years is we're going into a high security prison, men's prison, and we're leading worship and teaching and praying with these guys. And I've had a lot of people say to me, like, doesn't that freak you out? And it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't at all. But if you gave me a power tool with a spinning blade, then I would be terrified.
Yeah.
Right. So it's thinking about, well, who are you as a couple? How can you serve together as a couple? And then having that sort of as something that you hold out in front of you and you pursue intentionally. I think that kind of engagement with the bigger world makes our own problems smaller. And
Yes.
there have been times when Christopher and I have gone to the prison and we have not talked to each other in the car because we've been mad at each other. And then we serve these men whose lives are so painful and so difficult. And they teach us things and they show us how to worship and they pray for us. And we come out and we just think, yeah, we're okay.
Yeah. That was really small, that thing we were fussing
Yeah.
about. I do. I love that that's such a hopeful, that's just such an aspirational vision, but yet it's aspirational, but yet it's not out of reach.
No.
It's something all of us can do. And you even said when you're serving alongside your spouse, you really appreciate their gifts.
Right.
And sometimes my husband and I will go down to a homeless shelter and I'm always like hiding behind the food because I'm really good with food. And I'm like serving the food. My husband will go sit down next to the scariest looking person and have a conversation with them. And I can always admire
Yes.
he'll do that because I'm really happy just putting food on the plates. I'm there and I'm participating, but
That's important.
but it's just really, and it makes us admire our spouse more. And it's something we all can do. We all can look for a telos and a way we can serve.
Yes, because it could be very simple, right? You as someone in your 50s or 60s could just look around you in the church and say, this couple just got married 2 months ago. Chances are they could use somebody to mentor them, to encourage them, to just be present to them, invite them over for dinner on a regular basis, and then just say, hey, if there's anything you want to talk about with marriage, we are totally here to listen to you. Can be that simple. Could be volunteering at, like you just talked about, some kind of a shelter or a food pantry. It doesn't have to be this like enormous thing. It can be very simple, but it should be something that you feel God's pleasure in as you're doing it, and that unifies you toward the mission of bringing his kingdom to earth.
Yeah, one of my friends, she's, at the same stage of life, and she was telling a group of us how she and her husband have stepped up to be on a committee at their church. It's kind of the first time they're stepping into that role,
Mhm.
in their mid-50s. And the look on her face, you can just see she's just shining. She's kind of a quieter person. And for her to just shine like that and get that big grin on her face. And I'm just like, I just told her, I said, I said, I'm really proud of you because she doesn't take on a lot of extra stuff. And I'm just like, I'm really proud of you. That is so awesome that you guys are doing that and doing together. So you helped me inspire my friend because that's something that I learned from you. So Dorothy, thank you so much for being here.
This was great. You are a terrific interviewer, so it was a wonderful conversation.
Well, it's just a lot of fun to be able to share your good work. So Marriage Champions, if you'd like to learn more about Dorothy and her resources, you can always find us at marriageinitiative.org.